Welcome to Faith Over Breakfast. You are listening to a podcast by Pastor Eric Deepen and Pastor Andy Littleton. If you enjoy Faith Over Breakfast, we encourage you to rate it on the Apple Podcast app, on Spotify, or Google Play. Thank you and enjoy the podcast. Welcome to Faith Over Breakfast. My name is Eric Deepen, and I am pastor of the Village Church in Tucson, Arizona. And across from me is Andy Littleton, who is pastor of Mission Church in Tucson. We're about 10 minutes away. Our churches are 15 minutes away from each other, and we live about 3 minutes away from each other.
Maybe
5 minutes. Maybe two.
Yeah.
Good jog between our houses. So we've been friends for a long time, been doing this podcast for a long time, and now we're in sort of what we would call, I think, lightning
rounds.
Yes, because of schedule and because, Andy, thank you for continuing this podcast with me.
Sure.
Even in the lightning round, we talked about our sermons. Yeah. It was fun.
It was fun.
Yeah.
So, thanks for tuning in and being interested in us and what we have to say.
Yeah. All right. Enjoy, guys. There we go.
Oh.
There we are. Hey,
what's up?
It's good to see you, Andy.
What are we talking about?
I thought we could go back to our old pattern, and I noticed you preached this last week.
I did.
I preached this last week.
Oh, okay.
So we could have a little conversation about what we are well versed at.
Oh,
because it's in our head.
Oh, okay.
Right? It's only been 2 days since you preached.
Yeah. Man, 2 days, it's a long time.
But before we get to that, did anybody in your church say they liked you?
No. Not based on the podcast.
Not based on the podcast.
Yeah.
This is disappointing to me.
It's exactly what I expected, Eric.
I didn't, because you're the brilliant prognosticator. You understand your church well.
I mean, I'm not saying they don't like me. I'm not saying they don't like me.
No.
I was just saying that they probably wouldn't listen so closely to this podcast or listen to the end of it or whatever version you might want to say there, to where they would then go, I'm going to do that.
They're not obedient.
At least in my experience so far, that's not a common thing.
Yeah. Well, I'm just going to keep trying. Please.
You can try.
I'm trying.
I'm not upset about this.
Oh, I don't think you should be. I just want to, I think it's...
Look, man, I like bumping into somebody from the village at Crave, and they tell me they appreciate it. That does the trick.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I don't, oddly enough, I don't think I go in the circles of the mission people. I don't bump into a lot of mission.
Well, there you go. There's a decent amount of Crave. I was at Crave yesterday.
I don't go to Crave, so that's...
Well, both of our churches are there.
That's if you want to visit.
Yeah. And my time with the people from Mission at Crave was wonderful. It was great. Oh, great to see you. How are you? Very good, thanks.
Love the podcast.
But they did not say, Andy, I listened to the podcast, and therefore I want to say I appreciate you. That's the thing that I'm talking about. That's all I'm talking about.
Oh, man.
So, other than that, I feel very loved and appreciated.
Well, I'm not saying you don't.
Yeah.
Maybe it's just for me. So I feel loved and appreciated by your church, by them telling you.
Telling me.
Yeah, it's very complicated.
Yeah.
And I'm a little bit of a diva or whatever. I need lots of patting and appreciation.
So do that for Eric.
Yeah.
Great.
Anyway, what did you preach about this week?
Well, so we've done a short series on the second half of 1 Thessalonians. So hope.
One of my favorite books.
Yeah. One of the
letters.
Yeah. And so the whole series was on hope, and of course you've got all this second coming sort of questions around what does that mean for Jesus to return in there, which is very hopeful. But this sermon, I will say, felt like the one where I had to give a lot more information to frame the idea of the day of the Lord and the coming of the Lord. Because and Rod has said this before, and I think it's very true. In churches with people with a lot of church background, Rod has said you can preach shorter sermons. In churches where there isn't a lot of background, sometimes you have to add a lot of background. And I think this one, you might need to add a lot of background no matter what, just because people come from Christian traditions that teach quite opposite sounding things on the topic.
Yeah.
Anyway, it felt like there needed to be a lot of explaining around the concept of the Day of the Lord before it could be applied. Maybe that was just me thinking that, but I felt I needed to do it. And I will say it was a little complicated by being out of town, celebrating my buddy John, co-pastor John, getting ready to be married with him and his friends. And we had a members meeting after church. So there was just a lot in my head.
Yeah, a lot of information banging around.
And not as much time to sift it. But
give us like a 2-minute 3-minute Lord's Day.
That's what I'm trying to say,
Oh,
Eric.
I don't agree. I think you can boil it down to the simple.
Yeah.
Because you know what? It's a question that people who have been followers of Jesus for a long time and those who haven't, they want to know what it means.
Mm-hmm.
It pops up in so many areas. It pops up in Philippians. It pops up in Isaiah. It pops up in, this.
Basically, what I taught Eric was that the Day of the Lord is a concept and theme that repeats throughout Scripture, even though there's an ultimate day of judgment and restoration in the future. But that you have to be very careful not to read them all to be speaking of the same event exclusively. And sometimes when one Day of the Lord is described, there's language that points to the ultimate Day of the Lord, even though the entirety of that language does not point to the same event. And so, or the way I described, I borrowed a little bit from a Bible Project explanation that said when you look at a range of mountains, you might see the biggest one behind it.
Yes.
And you might not see all the mountains in front of it. And that's
it's
kind of...
It's not a Bible Project exclusive.
Yeah. No, and he even suggested he got it from somewhere else. But but that is a helpful image. So I used Mount Lemmon and the Santa Catalinas, and it can look like one big mass.
Right.
But it isn't. And so when you read something like Isaiah, it might be speaking of the actual geopolitical events of his day, also might be showing you some things about Christ, and also might be showing you some things about the ultimate day of judgment. Mm-hmm. And it can be hard to interpret. And so because 1 Thessalonians follows Matthew 24, we especially looked at Jesus in Matthew 24 talking about the temple, and he's talking about the literal temple will be torn down. He's also talking about himself, his body that will be raised in 3 days. And he's using some language that seems to be speaking of the end of time as we know it. And if you don't understand that, you might be looking for all of that stuff to happen at the same time and be confused.
Yeah. No, I think that's really helpful. And I think when listening to you, one could think that it's actually harder than it really is.
Right.
It's not actually that hard. It can just be confusing to the cursory reading.
And unfortunately, and I tried to say this at church, unfortunately, a lot of us in church have been taught the cursory reading. Mm-hmm. And that's hard. I had an interesting thought on this, Eric. Like, I have been very much for not the professionalization of the clergy that you all need, and I'm still not saying you have to have a high degree, but doing something like this is an argument for clergy that studies hard.
Yes. Because
if you don't, you just read it in English. There's so much you don't unpack.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's, again, to use a word that you're going to say, oh, why don't you describe that word? But to use a word, in a good hermeneutic, so the way you understand and study Scripture, there has to be an element of a reliance on those who study in academia.
Yes.
Because even if you are a seminary trained pastor,
you
still have to rely on academia, and they're important in our world as followers of Jesus because they have dedicated their life and their calling to the study of Scripture and to bring it the nuance and the depth and the holistic understanding of it. They're working hard to bring that to us.
And usually, as in all fields of study, they're not just studying the whole Bible that hard. They actually pick a very specific. So one scholar I've been reading on 1 Thessalonians is G.K. Beale, and part of that was because he has put emphasis into these exact kind of day of the Lord. What does it look like, end times, eschatological, or end of all things questions.
Sure.
And I know he has, because he's put out tons of stuff. I've gone to lectures of his. So I was like, well, I'm going to read him along with a couple other people on this because I can't focus that much on it. I can't. There's no way. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, there you go.
No, I like that. That's really good. And I think it's helpful for people now. They'll have some sense of where to start with the day of the Lord.
Yeah. I'll tell you, the hardest part for me before we go to you was we're seeing a lot. We had a lot of guests on Sunday, and it was
that's awesome.
Yeah, it is. And
we did not.
Really? Yeah, we did. We were like, whoa, okay. And people who are unsure about faith, still new to faith, or kind of like wrestling with it. And I've been surprised in good ways about topics that I thought were not appealing to those folks, and it was. Like I preached one week on elders, and it was just there it was in the text, and somebody came who hadn't been to church in a long time, reported to us that they'd had terrible leadership experiences, and when they heard this thing on how, good elders should actually oversee the church and a pastor shouldn't run it, apparently that was very compelling to them. So I thought it wasn't. So this is one where I went, man, for all these visitors, this feels like like a lot of information, very thick. But who knows? So one, I was just going to say, my struggle was I want to make things accessible, but this one felt like it took way more. It felt more lecture-y to me.
Yeah. Well,
anyway,
sometimes
we'll see.
that's the part you have to play. And I know from having done this for like 20 years that, you develop your speaking style and you figure out how to make that balance of information versus, boots to the ground or wheel, whatever, tires to the road. How do I apply these things to my life? But it seems as you build a congregation, it is required as you're to really lay out a lot of details and help people understand what's going on. You always have to do that, but there is something about early church planting, in that first 10 years where there is a lot of like, hey, I'm going to do a 45-minute lecture, and it's mostly going to be theologically oriented or doctrinally oriented. And
as I've said about our church, I think on here, because of 2021 and a merger before that, it feels like we're like 1 to 2 years into a church plant. Yeah. Even though it's been far longer, but this group has not been together as a group that long. Yeah. So, okay. What'd you preach on?
Well, we're in a series called Radical Discipleship.
Ooh.
So I need to preface all of this in saying it happened because I titled one sermon, which was this particular sermon that I preached this week, called Radical Hospitality.
Yeah.
And good old Pastor Michael, as we're planning out the sermon series, he's like, well, if that one's radical,
this one's radical,
then we just need to call them all radical.
Yeah.
And so it's like a 14-week series, and we've talked about radical courage, radical waiting, radical following, radical evangelism. Now we're talking about radical hospitality. We're going to talk about radical gender. And so it's
radical gender.
Yeah.
Wow.
And this
spicy.
Yeah. Just so, and radical meaning either very extreme or down to the essence of something. And so we talked about hospitality and what that looks like and what it looks like to be a people who welcome the unwanted guest and how we are unwanted guests and how Jesus became the unwanted guest. It's this whole theme, but I think the thing that really struck people and I built a lot of conversation was, one, really getting in touch with their own story of being unwanted.
Yeah.
And what Jesus has to say to that, how Jesus welcomes them. And then also, we use Philippians chapter 2 as the main source text of Jesus, Paul inviting people to if they have any encouragement in Christ, if they have what your experience of Christ is then have the mind of Christ. So this response to God's hospitality to you.
Yeah.
And then just kind of looking at how Jesus became the unwanted guest, died, so that we would all belong. So that's a big, that was the big theme. But I think what people began to realize was, there's a lot of unwanted in my life. Like,
Right.
and the thing that really I challenge people with, and it's because it was a challenge to me, is that when you look at Jesus's life, and I in particular looked at when Jesus heads to the, he gets off the boat in Mark chapter 5, and he's headed somewhere, and the synagogue ruler comes and says, my daughter is sick, but you can heal him and of course Jesus heads that way, but he gets interrupted by this woman who's suffering with bleeding and touches his cloak, and he stops everything. And it talked about how really she's an unwanted guest to the community, and I explained what that looks like, and also then how Jesus encounters her, even though he's supposed to be headed to heal a young girl. He takes the interruption, and my argument is that radical hospitality mostly happens in the interruption, and Jesus was constantly interrupted, and he stopped for people, and he invited them in, like children, this woman. And so I just challenge people to think through the interruptions of their own life, and that is where you're going to find Jesus.
A lot of times, and you know this, hospitality can be cast as something that you plan really well to do and execute at a high level. Like the table is set perfectly, people are wowed. It's a near flawless evening or whatever.
And you're inviting the people that you really want to have over. I opened the sermon with Martha Stewart's most recent commercial where she has this big samurai sword, and it's a commercial for Pfizer, and she's talking about, everybody basically is waiting for that unwanted guest to leave. That unwanted guest you have that everyone is waiting to leave. And that is the picture of that you only want in your home when you're serving people, the people you want to have there. And those you don't, you want to get rid of them as soon as you possibly can. And that's our culture. I mean, we think that way. We categorize in wanted and unwanted in broad concepts, in our culture. I mean, border conversations we're having now to, in our own life. Like the person who interrupts us when we're headed in to go grocery shopping because they want a couple bucks, to our friend who just is a little bit annoying and stays a little too long, to the family member who is just struggling and really hard to deal with.
Right.
So there's
always brings up something in the news you don't want to talk about.
Yeah, there's like all of this, and really beginning to understand that Paul's call is well, if you've tasted any comfort, anything from Jesus, then you have this radical hospitality to offer the person who is unwanted.
So how do you balance that or speak to that in a day where so many of our folks are really focused on self-care?
Well, yeah, I feel like that is the one thing that pastors, this will sound weird, pastors have to support and speak against all at the same time. Because I think a lot of times there's one set of people who just pour themselves out and don't take care of themselves, right?
No doubt.
On the other hand, we live in a culture that has begun to be taught to narrate itself as a victim to everything.
Everything that isn't comfortable becomes trauma.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the thing is you and I, who are completely aware of that, I think, do it all the time. We narrate our lives as victims nonstop.
I think it's so hard not to. It's everything you hear now.
Yeah.
And honestly, not just in liberal spaces or whatever.
No, everywhere.
Everywhere.
Yeah. And it feels good.
Yeah.
I because it's about me.
Right.
And I think that, and it's not new.
I can't hear that. This is not comfortable for me. I need to be in a place where I'm understood and seen and so on and so forth. Yeah.
But you look at what Peter says, you look at what it says in Hebrews, you look at what it says in Romans 12 from Paul about hospitality. The word means love of stranger, and yet you're called to have that brotherly love for the people that are in your community and the people who are outside. So everyone is the stranger who is to be loved as a brother.
Right.
And so that means that you have to the hard part is to help people see that Jesus is the one who fulfills the longing.
Right.
And Jesus is the one who says you belong. And that means more than anything that anyone else says. And it's sustaining. It's a sustaining belonging because it comes through identity, right? Mm-hmm. You're a citizen. You're a child of the household. You have all these identities that you can rest in. which allow you then to care for someone else because you don't have to have all your needs and demands met.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, and you find Jesus. I think the argument is when I care for you, then I will meet Jesus. It's
well, right, which is he says so, right?
Yeah,
that's actually when
that.
you are encountering me.
Yeah. And I think the other thing is when you look at the early church, it's just the evidence of radical hospitality and how it transformed the Roman Empire and transformed like where we are now and how we think about things now. It's mind blowing. It's a exciting thing to join in on and be part of. So I don't know. I think
how'd it go?
I think it went great.
Yeah.
I think this whole series has been really good for our community.
Yeah.
And it's really got people talking because we chose to go very practical.
Yeah.
And very simple.
Yeah.
And so it's given people a lot to think through and like last week Michael preached on radical evangelism and he asked the question like, who are you chained to? Like, and he used Paul's imprisonment to the Praetorian Guard.
Yeah.
And really challenged people to begin to think through, like, who am I chained to? And who then needs the gospel? Because those are the people that God's calling me to bring the gospel to. Right? The whole Roman Praetorian Guard heard the gospel because they were chained to Paul. Yeah. And then you start thinking through, and he started helping, people think about what those chains are and how you would process that. And it was really good. Yeah. So I think it's giving people a lot of stuff to like think through.
Yeah. That's good stuff.
Yeah. So I'm excited about what God is doing in our community.
Yeah.
I mean, being a pastor isn't easy. And being a follower of Jesus is not easy. Like this is I mean, when you talk about radical
it's not
discipleship.
It's not a call to ease anyway. Yeah.
No, it's total surrender to the one who saved you. Mm-hmm. And that's a lot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. I think it is we do forget to say that. Feels unappealing, but to say that we're not doing an easy thing here.
Right.
It's what we're made to do.
Yeah.
But it's so there's deep fulfillment in that, and you really get to know Jesus. But this isn't a way to enjoy life.
Yeah.
Per se, it's you will.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I mean the relationship with the one who created you, it's pretty profound.
Yeah.
But it's also all consuming. I think we forget. Excuse me, that the gospel is part of it, a strong part of it, a big part of it is Jesus is Lord.
Yeah.
Like that is a lot. We've emphasized Jesus paid the price for your sins.
Yeah.
Jesus rose from the dead and gives you an opportunity to live in eternity in relationship with God. But the kingship and lordship of Jesus, I think a lot of times we think of ourselves as sometimes level with Jesus, maybe even sometimes over him and what we want to try to get him to do for us.
He's kind of helping us.
Yes. Yeah. And when we're not in allegiance and submission to the king and waiting to be told where we need to go and what we need to do.
Right.
And that's right. It's not that doesn't sell books. Or not many of them.
No. Well, unless it's anyway, never mind.
Yeah.
Unless it's Jesus is Lord in the ways that I want him to be Lord over you.
Yes. Right. Oh yeah, no.
Because we all, right, are excellent at seeing the way that Jesus should be Lord over others.
Right.
Yeah. Me included.
Yeah, no, I think, yeah.
All right.
So yeah, that's what we talked about.
Well, I mean, unfortunately, due to my whole Tuesday life, that's about where we're at.
It, yeah.
Yeah.
Your Tuesday life. Well, hey, we have a book promotion. Andy wrote this book.
I have ordered copies.
Ordered copies.
When you're an author and you're self-published on Amazon, which this is my first time learning how to do that. If you ordered a copy, you'd have it tomorrow. I ordered one; it takes 2 weeks.
Oh, okay.
Somehow, as the author, your book takes longer.
And it's cheaper for you, though, right?
It is cheaper.
Yeah,
so I can resell them. And actually, if you want to buy one from me, if you buy it from me, Don't tell Amazon. They already know. I will make a lot more on it if you buy it from me than if it sells on the marketplace.
Awesome. And how much are you selling your book for?
$10.
$10. So if you want Andy's book and you've already sent us a question, then you will have to buy it. It's $10.
No, you won't have to buy it. If you send us a question,
no, if you
we're going to
send
give
us
it
a
away.
question, but if you're a person who's already sent a question,
in the past,
we're not giving books away to you. But if you've never sent a question, send one. Give us your mailing address, and we will answer your question on air and on podcast. I don't know, in the pod. I don't know.
Yeah.
And,
so the books, as we mentioned before, What We Do with Jesus, it's on Amazon. If you want to buy a copy off of me and you're around here, email us faithoverbreakfast@gmail.com. If you're asking a question, we've got a few we're going to send out for first-time question askers. If you're not, but you just want to buy one off me, let me know. I'll be at Crave. I'll have one. Somewhere around Valentine's Day.
So sometime around Valentine's Day, bring $10 cash and or use Cash App or Zelle or whatever.
Something like that.
Give the man some money.
There you go.
Get a book.
Yeah, it's probably gonna push me into the next stratosphere of
New York bestseller.
Success.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, dude, it's funny. These phone calls, I never got them when the other ones went through.
Yeah,
I'm pretty sure it's spam, but it's funny. It's all this like, oh, I've got your copies of your 3 books here. Would you like to be a part of the LA Times Authors Symposium or something? And I'm like, this can't be right. This makes no sense. It doesn't. But it's wow. But it sort of feels good.
I bet it feels a little good though.
And then I looked on my Amazon thing. It's like, oh, I've sold 16. I make $2 each. I make $30.
LA.
Whoa, LA, watch out.
Coming.
The $30 man's on his way. And by the way, the proceeds go to Infuse, which is something that is like a multi-church program that we're running. So Infuse is making $30.
Yeah, so feel good about your purchase of this book.
Yeah, it is going to support people who are working out missional ideas in a community and having their theology shape their for-profit or non-profit ideas. There you go.
Yeah.
Bada bing.
Bada bing. All right. So thanks. That was great.
See you next time.
All right. See you next time. You've been listening to Faith Over Breakfast with Pastor Eric Siepen and Pastor Andy Littleton. Please share us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Thank you.